What if the most dangerous thing on the Great Plains wasn't the cold, but the instinct to run from it? In a whiteout blizzard, the wrong decision doesn't make you uncomfortable. It ends you. At 40 degrees below zero, with wind tearing across open land, exposed skin can freeze in under 5 minutes. Lose your direction. Lose your dryness. Lose control of your breathing. The plains offer no mercy. No caves. No forests. No second chances. Most people think survival means finding shelter. But out here, choosing the wrong one is how people disappear. Now here's the part that sounds insane. For many indigenous travelers and hunters, the safest place during a blizzard was not wood, not stone, not fire, but snow itself. The very thing that kills you was the thing they trusted with their lives. To survive a night like this, you don't fight winter. You learn how it works. Snow can be warm. In extreme cold, panic burns energy faster than movement ever could. That's why the first rule was never to build immediately. It was to stop, slow down, and assess. Indigenous winter travelers understood this instinctively. They read storms the way sailors read the sea. Not as chaos, but as information. They watched the wind, how it shifted, where it strengthened, where it broke. They studied the snow, its texture, its weight. Whether it drifted loose or packed hard, they noticed subtle changes in the land. Small dips and shallow folds invisible in summer, but life-saving in winter. They didn't wander blindly, hoping to stumble upon shelter. They chose where to surrender to the storm. A shallow ravine where the wind lost its bite. The leeward side of a rise where snow piled dense and stable. A drift shaped and hardened by days of relentless wind. From that moment on, nothing was wasted. Every step had intent. Every movement was measured. Rushing meant sweating. Sweating meant moisture. And moisture, in extreme cold, was a death sentence. One careless step could end everything. One slip into deep snow. One layer soaked through by exertion. In those conditions, survival wasn't decided by strength or speed. It was decided by restraint. By knowing when to stop moving, and when to let the land, not the body, take the punishment of the storm. Because in winter like this, the difference between life and death could be as small as a single, unnecessary step. Snow only works when you treat it like material, not powder. Loose snow kills. Packed snow protects. Indigenous winter knowledge wasn't abstract. It was practical, physical, and precise. They knew that not all snow was the same. Some snow collapsed under pressure. Some held its shape. And some, when packed correctly, could breathe just enough to keep air moving while stopping the wind outside. That knowledge shaped a strict routine. There was no improvisation. First, snow was piled into a mound. Then it was packed tight, layer by layer. The structure was left alone, allowing the cold to harden it from the inside out. Only after the mass set solid did carving begin. The chamber inside was kept deliberately small. Not for comfort. For survival. Large spaces bleed heat. Small spaces trap it. As people breathed, warmth slowly transferred into the walls. The snow reflected that heat back toward the body instead of letting it escape. Over time, the inner surface softened just enough to form a thin ice glaze. That glaze wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a weakness. It was a seal. It blocked the wind completely, turning the shelter into a quiet pocket of still air while the storm raged outside. From the inside, the blizzard became distant. Muted. Contained. But even in a shelter built this carefully, one rule was never ignored. One detail determined whether the space remained a refuge or became a trap. They never forgot it. And before the night was over, it would decide everything. Cold alone rarely killed people. Moisture did. That understanding shaped every part of daily winter life. Survival wasn't about enduring low temperatures. It was about staying dry, hour after hour, mistake after mistake. Snow was shaken from clothing before anyone entered shelter. Not brushed casually, but beaten loose with intention. Anything left clinging to fabric would melt from body heat, soak inward, and destroy insulation from the inside out. While moving, layers were vented deliberately. Not to cool down, but to prevent sweating. Sweat was dangerous. Once clothing became damp, the cold didn't just creep in. It locked on. Wet insulation was replaced immediately. No hesitation. No sentiment. Footwear mattered most, because feet failed first. Moccasins were never tight. They were intentionally roomy. Inside, dry grass or moss filled the space. It trapped warm air around the foot while pulling moisture away from the skin. When it dampened, it was removed and replaced without debate. No washing. No drying fires. Just constant renewal. Every evening followed the same rhythm. Not tradition, procedure. Feet checked first. Then hands. Then every layer of clothing. Problems were addressed before exhaustion set in. Before darkness fully closed in. Because once you slept, options disappeared. Preparing for morning mattered more than comfort at night. Waking up functional mattered more than waking up warm. In conditions like these, survival wasn't heroic. It was methodical. And those who lived through winter understood a simple truth. You didn't survive the cold by enduring it. You survived by never giving it moisture to work with. Fire looks like survival. On the open plains, it was only insurance. A large fire wasted fuel faster than it provided safety. It flared hot, burned fast, and demanded constant feeding. A smoky fire was even worse. It killed airflow, trapped fumes, and turned shelter into a hazard. And a fire you couldn't sustain through the night was more dangerous than having no fire at all. That's why winter fires were kept deliberately small. Controlled. Predictable. Fuel was chosen carefully. Dried bison dung burned slow and steady, producing even heat without sudden flare-ups. Fat-rich bones smoldered when nothing else would, releasing warmth long after flames disappeared. Even embers were treated like living things. Carried from place to place. Guarded from wind, never wasted. Fire wasn't built for comfort. It was built to protect margins. To dry tools without charring them. To warm stones that could hold heat long after the flame dimmed. To melt snow carefully, without soaking clothing or flooding the shelter with steam. Every use of fire had a purpose. Every purpose had a limit. The goal was never warmth alone. Warmth without control could kill as surely as cold. Control meant knowing when to feed the fire, and when to let it fade. When to rely on heat, and when to rely on insulation, discipline, and the body itself. Lose control of fire, and fuel disappears. Air becomes dangerous. Moisture creeps in. And once that happens, the night takes over. In winter like this, fire was not a savior. It was a tool. One that had to be managed with restraint, or not used at all. Survival didn't happen at night. It was decided hours before darkness arrived. Every winter evening followed the same discipline, repeated so often it became instinct. Not ritual. Procedure. Snow was shaken from clothing before anyone entered shelter. Not brushed away casually, but struck loose with intent. Anything left clinging to fabric would melt, seep inward, and erase insulation from the inside out. While moving, layers were opened deliberately. Not to cool down, but to avoid sweating. Before stopping, those layers were sealed again, trapping warmth without trapping moisture. Checks followed a strict order. Feet first. Hands second. Sleep last. Because frozen fingers were painful. Frozen feet ended journeys. Moccasins stayed loose by design. Tight footwear cut circulation and trapped moisture. Loose space allowed insulation to work. Dry grass or moss lined the interior, pulling moisture away from skin while trapping warm air around the foot. When it failed, when it darkened or clumped, it was discarded without hesitation. No nostalgia. No attachment. Anything that threatened dryness was removed. Immediately. This wasn't tradition handed down for comfort or identity. It was triage performed daily, without emotion. Problems were addressed before exhaustion set in. Before hunger dulled judgment. Before darkness closed the window for correction. Because once the night began, choices narrowed. Mistakes multiplied, and recovery became unlikely. In winter like this, discipline was protection. Routine was insurance. Those who survived understood that staying alive wasn't about enduring hardship. It was about removing risk before it could compound. And the quiet work done in the evening, the checking, the discarding, the restraint, determined whether morning ever came. Hunger was dangerous, but timing mattered more than quantity. In extreme cold, food wasn't about comfort or satisfaction. It was about when energy entered the body and how long it stayed there. Eating before sleep was never indulgence. It was strategy. As the fire dimmed and the night settled in, digestion took over the work of warming the body. Fat burned slowly, releasing heat over hours instead of minutes. Long after flames faded, that internal fire kept blood moving and muscles responsive. This is why winter diets were deliberate and repetitive. Pemmican wasn't food in the modern sense. It was stored heat. Dried meat alone wasn't enough. Fat was essential. Mixed together, they created a compact source of energy that could be carried, stored, and eaten without preparation even in brutal weather. Bone marrow worked the same way. Dense. Efficient. A direct conversion of digestion into warmth. A full stomach meant the body could fight the cold while you rested. Metabolism stayed active. Heat stayed inside. An empty stomach meant the opposite. As energy dropped, circulation slowed. Cold gained ground without resistance. That's why hunger was treated as a threat, not an inconvenience. And why food was eaten with intent, not appetite. Variety was a luxury reserved for warmer seasons. In winter, repetition meant reliability. You ate what worked, what lasted, what kept the body burning steadily through the longest hours of darkness. Fuel was survival, and knowing when to consume it was just as important as knowing how to build shelter or manage fire. In the cold, the body itself became a furnace, but only if it was fed at the right moment. Snow shelters worked so well. They could also kill. That was the paradox. What kept the cold out could just as easily trap danger inside. Without ventilation, warmth stopped being protection and became a threat. Breath accumulated. Moisture thickened the air. Oxygen thinned silently. In a space this small, minutes mattered. That's why every snow refuge, no matter how carefully built, followed two rules that were never optional. There had to be a breathing hole above, and a cold sink below. This wasn't tradition. It was physics. Warm air rises. Cold air falls. When shaped correctly, heavy cold air settled near the entrance, while warm air heated by breath and body heat gathered where the body rested. Fresh air moved in slowly from below. Stale air escaped upward. The shelter breathed just enough to keep life inside. The balance was fragile, exact, unforgiving. Miss that rule, and everything changed. Warmth became a trap. Carbon dioxide built without warning. Oxygen slipped away unnoticed. People didn't freeze. They faded. That was the mistake outsiders made. Not weakness. Not fear. Misunderstanding. Indigenous builders never treated snow shelters as caves. They understood them as systems. Structures that had to control heat, air, and moisture at the same time. Built with that knowledge, snow became protection. Built without it, the same shelter became a silent end. These people didn't survive winter because they were tougher. They survived because they were calmer. They didn't fight the cold head-on. They budgeted against it, measuring energy, moisture, time, and risk with care. Food, clothing, shelter, even emotion, were shaped around a single truth. Winter always wins, unless you understand its rules. Today, we live surrounded by insulation, power grids, and endless fuel. And yet, remove electricity for a single night, and most of us would be unprepared. Not because we're weaker, but because we've forgotten how to think this way. Stories like this aren't about hardship for its own sake. They're about intelligence under pressure. About knowledge forged when there was no backup plan. If this changes how you see survival, and the people who mastered it long before modern technology, then you understand why native legends uncovered exists. Not to romanticize the past, but to remember the thinking that once kept people alive. When failure meant silence, not inconvenience.